There is a kind of danger that does not shout. It doesn't arrive with chaos or destruction. It arrives quietly in ordinary faces, in normal lives, in the rhythm of everyday thoughts that no one ever questions. Carl Jung warned of it long before the modern world was even built. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, because the danger is not out there. It's in here, hidden beneath masks, so convincing that even the wearer forgets they're wearing one. This is the most dangerous psychological phenomenon Jung ever studied, the possession by the unconscious, when the mask devours the face and the shadow becomes the self. It's not possession by demons, but by the parts of us we refuse to see, by the rage we repress, by the fear we hide, by the lies we tell ourselves in the mirror just to make it through another day. When you refuse to confront your own darkness, your darkness begins to confront the world for you. It leaks through your words, your choices, your relationships. It twists perception, poisons empathy, and hides beneath moral superiority. The face remains calm, but inside, the shadow is steering the ship. And that, Jung said, is where true evil is born. Not in monsters, but in the ordinary man who refuses to face his own soul. The most dangerous mind in the world is not the one that breaks, it's the one that pretends it hasn't. Because denial is the seed of destruction. You can only suppress truth for so long before it finds another way to speak. Through anxiety, through anger, through projection, through the need to control everything you don't understand. And that is where we are now, a world full of fragmented selves, each terrified of what lives beneath the surface. We've replaced introspection with distraction, shadow work with performance, truth with image. We've traded consciousness for convenience. And Jung's warning echoes louder than ever. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Every addiction, every ideology, every endless scroll through artificial validation, it's all avoidance. Because to sit in silence, to really face yourself, is to encounter everything you've buried. Your envy, your ego, your longing, your despair, and that is what people fear more than death, self-awareness. The most dangerous sign of Jungian psychology is not psychopathy, not narcissism, not sociopathy. It's the unconscious life lived as if it were conscious. The life that looks awake but is actually sleepwalking through archetypes and impulses. The mind that believes it is free while it is utterly enslaved by what it refuses to feel. Look around. Everywhere you see it, the performance of morality without empathy. The obsession with self-image without self-knowledge. The influencer preaching authenticity while hiding behind filters. The politician demanding integrity while drowning in shadow. The spiritual teacher who has mastered language but not themselves. We have become experts in everything except being human. And Jung would say this is not evolution. This is regression disguised as progress. Because the shadow, ignored, does not disappear. It evolves. It becomes collective. It becomes ideology, mob mentality, digital witch hunts, moral crusades. It hides in virtue and calls itself good. That's what makes it so dangerous, because evil that knows it's evil can be fought, but evil that believes it's righteous cannot. The most dangerous people are not the monsters in the dark. They're the ones who smile while destroying, convinced of their own goodness. This is the possession of the modern psyche. We have become fragments of archetypes, the hero without humility, the victim without accountability, the rebel without cause, each playing a role, none becoming whole. And here's the truth. Jung was brave enough to face every human being is capable of unimaginable darkness. Every saint carries a shadow. Every hero has a tyrant sleeping inside them. The only difference between the conscious and the unconscious man is that one admits it and the other denies it until it's too late. When you deny the shadow, it doesn't die. it festers. And when it festers, it finds expression through hate, through envy, through blind conformity. The unexamined mind becomes a weapon, and that weapon doesn't need intention, only ignorance. Jung saw it in his patients. He saw it in history. He saw it in the rise of collective movements that promised salvation but delivered destruction. He watched entire nations project their inner chaos onto the world, purging what they feared in themselves by crucifying it in others. The shadow was not confronted, it was organized. That is the real danger when the inner war becomes external. When a society's repressed darkness becomes a machine. You can see it today in comment sections and parliaments, in corporations and communities. Everywhere there is outrage without self-awareness, virtue without empathy, performance without soul. Everyone is sure they're right, and that certainty itself is the possession. The most dangerous sign of the Jungian psyche is the person who has lost contact with their own unconscious. They think they are conscious because they can explain themselves, but they are not. They are narrating the story their ego wrote to keep them safe from truth. And the ego, that fragile narrator, is terrified of one thing: exposure. So it hides behind intellect, behind superiority, behind belonging to a group that provides ready-made enemies. Because as long as you are fighting external evil, you never have to face your own. That is why Jung said the path to enlightenment is not imagining figures of light, but making the darkness conscious. You cannot become whole by pretending to be good. You become whole by admitting you're not. You integrate what you've denied. You face what you feared. You reclaim what you've projected. This is the inner revolution, not the one that screams, but the one that listens. Not the one that conquers, but the one that integrates. Not the one that destroys others, but the one that dissolves illusion. Because the most dangerous sign of all, the one Jung feared above any diagnosis, is the moment when a person believes they have nothing left to learn about themselves. That is the death of consciousness. The moment you stop questioning, you stop growing. The moment you believe you are good, you stop evolving. Goodness without awareness becomes tyranny. Spirituality without shadow work becomes delusion. Empathy without boundaries becomes self-destruction. To stay alert is not to stay paranoid, it's to stay conscious. To watch your own reactions as you would watch a stranger's. To question your moral certainty. To notice the stories you tell yourself, to stay comfortable. Because the unconscious does not sleep. It waits, it watches, and if you are not aware of it, it will live your life for you. Every lie you tell yourself becomes its doorway. Every emotion you repress becomes its voice. Every time you point at someone else's darkness, your own grows stronger in the dark. You are never done facing it. You are never safe from illusion. And that is both the danger and the beauty of being human. Because in that danger lies awakening. In that awareness lies freedom. When you finally turn toward the darkness, it no longer frightens you. Because you see, it was never your enemy. It was your teacher. The part of you that refused to lie, even when your ego demanded it. And when you integrate that darkness, when you learn to hold both love and rage, forgiveness and discernment, humility and power, you become something the world desperately needs, but rarely understands. A whole human being. That is the rarest state of all. Not purity, but integration. Not perfection, but balance. Not light without shadow, but light that understands shadow. That is what Jung meant by individuation, becoming undivided. The man who can walk into his own darkness without fear of it. The woman who can see her own shadow and no longer need to project it onto others. That is the cure to the danger. That is the antidote to possession. Because once you make the unconscious conscious, once you drag the shadow into light, once you see your own darkness and say, yes, that is me, but it does not own me, you become free. You stop being dangerous to others because you've stopped being blind to yourself. And the world, as chaotic as it may seem, begins to mirror that peace. Stay alert, not against others, but against your own sleep, because the real danger has never been outside of you. It's been within, quietly waiting, patiently watching, until the day you finally turn to face it and awaken. When you finally face it, everything changes. You start to see that life was never conspiring against you, it was conspiring for you. Every conflict, every betrayal, every failure was a mirror meant to reveal the unconscious patterns you refused to acknowledge. The darkness wasn't punishment, it was precision, it was intelligence, it was your own soul trying to get your attention. Because the unconscious will never ask politely. It will sabotage, it will disrupt, it will dismantle everything that is false until you finally stop and listen. The relationships that collapse, the careers that crumble, the anxieties that rise at night, these are not curses, they are signals. The psyche is speaking. And until you make its voice conscious, you will keep mistaking its wisdom for bad luck. Jung once said that people don't have ideas, ideas have people. He meant that what we don't make conscious will take us over. Every ideology, every movement, every obsession that grips humanity begins this way. An archetype awakened in the collective unconscious, seizing the minds of those too unrooted to resist. And that's what makes awareness so vital, because without it, you are not choosing your beliefs. They are choosing you. Stay alert. Watch what captures your energy. Ask yourself, did I choose this thought, or did it choose me? Did I shape this belief, or did the crowd hand it to me, wrapped in moral certainty? Because the unconscious loves disguises. It hides in righteousness, in virtue, in belonging. It convinces you that you're awake while you're sleepwalking through someone else's dream. You see it everywhere now. People no longer think. They feel opinions. They no longer question. They repeat. They don't examine their rage. They weaponize it. They don't face their fear. They baptize it as truth. And that's the danger of living in an age without introspection, when algorithms know our shadows better than we do. Jung would call this the collective possession, when the individual no longer has a soul of their own, but becomes a fragment of the group mind. And when that happens, humanity becomes capable of anything, because responsibility dissolves. People commit horrors, not because they are evil, but because they are unconscious. They are convinced, righteous, certain, and utterly asleep. This is why self-awareness is not self-indulgence, it is self-defense. Because the moment you forget your own shadow, it finds a way to rule you. It whispers through envy, speaks through judgment, hides behind the need to control. It makes you project your inner conflict onto others so you can stay blind to it. Projection is the oldest trick of the ego. It lets you hate in others what you cannot accept in yourself. That's why the things you most despise in others often mirror what you repress within. The arrogant, the manipulative, the weak, the needy. They are not random irritations, they are invitations to self-knowledge. Each person you cannot stand is your unconscious pointing and saying, there, that's where you still need to look. But the unawakened mind doesn't want to look. It wants to blame. It wants to fight external dragons, so it never has to face the one inside. And that is how the unconscious keeps the game alive. Endless conflict, endless projection, endless distraction. Because the more you look outward, the less you see inward. This is why Jung said the greatest danger to humanity is not technology or war or chaos. It is the unconscious mind left unexamined. Because no amount of external progress can compensate for internal blindness. You can build civilizations, conquer planets, and digitize souls, but if the shadow remains unacknowledged, it will burn everything you build to the ground. And yet, there is hope, profound, quiet, luminous hope. Because once you turn inward, even slightly, the unconscious begins to cooperate. It doesn't want to destroy you, it wants to complete you. It wants you to see what you've denied, to reclaim what you've lost, to unify what you've divided. This is the path of individuation, the slow, relentless, miraculous process of becoming whole. Not good, not pure, not perfect, whole. To be whole means to include what was once rejected, to integrate the darkness, not deny it, to hold the tension between opposites, the saint and the sinner, the hero and the coward, the healer and the destroyer, and let them both exist without judgment. That is maturity of soul. That is what Jung meant when he said, I would rather be whole than good. And because goodness without awareness is fragile. It can be corrupted, manipulated, erased. But wholeness cannot be bought or controlled. It is self-generated. It is sovereignty of the spirit. It is the end of unconscious living. When you reach this level of consciousness, you begin to see the world differently. You no longer divide humanity into villains and victims. You see sleeping souls acting out their pain, their projections, their forgotten traumas. You begin to respond instead of react. You begin to observe without absorbing. You begin to understand that evil is not a cosmic mistake, it is unintegrated potential. Love twisted by fear, creation distorted by ignorance. And in that understanding, compassion is born, not the sentimental kind, but the fierce kind. The kind that can look at darkness and still choose awareness. The kind that refuses to be infected by the hatred it perceives. This is the consciousness the modern world has forgotten. We have replaced wisdom with knowledge, introspection with opinion, and awareness with performance. We've turned identity into armor instead of mirror. We've become so afraid of silence that we mistake noise for truth. But truth lives in silence. Truth reveals itself only to those willing to listen without agenda. Because truth, like the unconscious, cannot be shouted into submission. It can only be seen. And when you see it, really see it, something extraordinary happens. You stop being possessed by it. You stop being moved by invisible forces. You stop living reactively, and you begin to live consciously. This is what it means to stay alert. In Jung's world, not to live in paranoia, but in presence. To stay awake inside your own awareness. To notice when your thoughts begin to repeat someone else's. To notice when your compassion turns into guilt. When your conviction turns into arrogance. When your self-image becomes a mask. Because that's when the unconscious is trying to creep back into control. It doesn't come as evil, it comes as righteousness. It doesn't come as destruction, it comes as good intention. It doesn't come to ruin you, it comes to protect your ego from reality. And the moment you forget that, you fall back asleep. To stay awake means to keep asking uncomfortable questions. What am I avoiding? What part of me do I still condemn? Where am I lying to myself and calling it kindness? Where am I hiding from my own power and calling it humility? This is the real inner work, not meditation as escape, not spirituality as performance, not philosophy as shield, but awareness as weapon. The weapon that cuts through illusion, starting with your own. Because in the end, the unconscious cannot destroy you, only your refusal to see it can. And once you turn to face it, it loses its power. The darkness dissolves in the light of attention. The shadow becomes guide instead of saboteur. And you, the awakened one, begin to move through life not as an actor in a dream, but as the dreamer who finally knows they are dreaming. That is the ultimate freedom. Not to control the world, but to know yourself so deeply that no world can control you. Not to be unafraid of darkness, but to walk through it illuminated from within. Not to become perfect, but to become real. And that is the rarest thing of all in this century of mirrors. A human being who is truly awake. So stay alert, not to the noise outside, but to the whispers within. Stay alert to the moments your ego wants to defend instead of understand. Stay alert to the projections that turn your fears into enemies. Stay alert to the way your own mind disguises its ignorance as certainty. Because awareness is not comfort, it's fire. And that fire, once lit, burns through everything false. It will consume your illusions, but it will reveal your soul. And that, in the end, is what Jung wanted humanity to remember. The unconscious is not your enemy. It is your unfinished self, the half of your soul that has been waiting for you to see it, to love it, to bring it home. And when you do, you will no longer fear the darkness, because you will understand. It was never darkness at all. It was truth, unseen. And when truth finally stops hiding from you, something extraordinary happens. A silence begins inside you that is not empty, but vast. It is the silence of alignment, the silence of a mind that no longer argues with itself. The silence that comes when the unconscious stops whispering in riddles because it has finally been heard. You begin to realize that this was what you were searching for all along, not happiness, not success, not validation, but integration, the peace of being undivided, the relief of not needing to pretend, the power of walking through the world as one whole, conscious being. It is then that Jung's deepest insight comes alive within you, that your soul has been guiding you through chaos, not to destroy you, but to make you real. Every crisis was a summons. Every betrayal was a mirror. Every collapse was a conversation between the part of you that knew and the part of you that refused to listen. Now you see it clearly. Nothing was random. Every wrong turn was an act of mercy in disguise. Every loss was simply the universe removing what could not follow you into awareness. Because what cannot survive truth must die in its presence. The danger of the unconscious is real, but the reward of consciousness is infinite. Once you awaken, you can no longer be manipulated by fear or guilt or shame, because you understand their origins, the ancient tools of control that kept humanity obedient to its own blindness. When you see how conditioning works, the reward systems, the tribal loyalties, the moral traps, you stop being a pawn. You become the observer of the game, not its prisoner. And that is the most terrifying thing to a world built on unconsciousness, an individual who cannot be controlled. Because the conscious man cannot be bought. The conscious woman cannot be shamed. They can be silenced, but they cannot be deceived. They can be isolated, but they cannot be corrupted. Their mind is no longer public property. Their perception is sovereign. This is why awakening has always been the most revolutionary act in existence. Not because it changes society, but because it changes the individual so profoundly that society must eventually follow. Every empire of manipulation, religious, political, psychological, begins to crack when even one person refuses to dream the collective dream. You start to see how everything around you, media, culture, algorithms, is not inherently evil, but unconscious. It's the projection of a species still afraid to face itself, a collective shadow screaming through technology, a civilization in therapy, unaware that it's in session, and suddenly your anger dissolves. You no longer rage against the system, you understand it. You see that the world is simply mirroring the unhealed psyche of humanity, the same patterns repeating through history because the unconscious keeps looping until it's seen. The wars outside are the wars within. The corruption outside is the repression inside. The noise outside is the silence we refuse to keep inside ourselves. Once you grasp this, judgment ends. Not because you excuse what's wrong, but because you see why it exists. You understand that no amount of hatred will heal what is unacknowledged. Only consciousness will. So you start living differently. You speak less, but when you do, your words cut through illusion. You act slower, but when you do, your actions align with something timeless. You no longer chase. You attract. You no longer react. You respond. You no longer try to save others. You inspire them simply by existing authentically. Because the conscious soul is magnetic, not from effort, but from essence. People feel something ancient when they're near you. They can't name it, but they feel it, the calm of someone who has faced their own abyss and returned whole. You become a kind of living mirror, silently reflecting everyone's truth back to them. And those who are ready for awareness are drawn to you. Those who are not will call you dangerous. And they're right. Awareness is dangerous, not to the soul but to illusion. It dismantles false power, false identity, false belonging. It destroys every mask that hides the sacred. It burns through comfort like wildfire. It kills who you were pretending to be, so you can finally become what you truly are. That is why Jung called this work terrifying. Because awakening is not ascension, it is excavation. You do not rise until you've gone down. You do not expand until you've contracted. You do not transcend until you've integrated. And yet, as the layers peel away, as the ego's armor finally drops, you find something far more powerful than safety. You find your soul untouched by time, unscarred by experience, unafraid of truth. You realize that underneath all the programming, you were never broken. You were simply buried. Every shadow was a piece of that burial, layers of conditioning, expectation, fear, and borrowed guilt. And now you stand here, naked in awareness, with nothing left to defend. And what remains? Only presence, only reality, only you. This is what Jung called the emergence of the self, not the persona, not the shadow, but the totality of being. The point where opposites no longer fight, but fuse. Where light doesn't destroy dark, but dances with it. Where love doesn't deny pain, but transforms it. And once you've tasted this state, you can never unknow it. It changes the way you see everything. Even suffering becomes sacred. You stop asking, why me? And start whispering, thank you. Because now you understand that darkness was never your enemy. It was your initiation. You look back at your life and see it not as chaos, but as choreography. Every heartbreak aligned you with clarity. Every betrayal redirected you toward truth. Every loss stripped away what could not sustain your evolution. Every fall was a descent into yourself. And now, as you stand in that awareness, calm, unshaken, awake, you begin to see what Jung meant when he said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Because the birth of the true self is not gentle, it's volcanic. But the eruption clears the landscape. It makes space for peace. This is the quiet mastery that the awakened carry. They are not loud. They are not performative. They do not announce their evolution. They embody it. They walk through the world like storms, disguised as still water. Deep, powerful, impossible to disturb. And the irony is, once you reach this level of awareness, you stop needing to prove anything at all. You stop needing to teach, to argue, to convince. You realize the most profound truths cannot be spoken. They can only be lived. So you live them. You live them in your tone, in your posture, in your silence. You live them through integrity that no one sees, through patience that no one rewards, through compassion that asks for nothing in return. This is what it means to transcend danger, not to escape it, but to integrate it until it becomes wisdom. Because the unconscious never truly disappears. It becomes an ally. It no longer rules you, it serves you. It warns you when your ego returns. It humbles you when pride arises. It reminds you that enlightenment is not a destination, it is a discipline. The discipline of awareness. And so you stay alert, not in fear, but in reverence. You stay awake, not because you're haunted, but because you're alive. You stay conscious, not because it's easy, but because it's sacred. You understand now that to fall asleep again is to betray everything your soul fought to remember. So you guard your awareness as a flame in the wind, tender, precious, unextinguished, because that flame, that inner light, is all humanity has ever truly needed. And perhaps that is the final irony. The most dangerous sign Jung ever warned us about, the possession by the unconscious, was never a prophecy of doom. It was a map, a call to awaken, a reminder that the shadow was never here to destroy you. It was here to make you divine. And when you finally understand that, when you can look into the dark and say, I see you, and I'm not afraid, you have transcended danger entirely, because you have become what the world needs most. A soul that can see clearly, feel deeply, and walk through both light and shadow without ever losing itself again. And so, the final truth emerges not as a revelation that shocks you, but as a knowing that settles deep into your bones. Awareness was never about escape. It was never about rising above the darkness. It was about learning how to stand inside it, unshaken, uncorrupted, unafraid. You begin to see that light is not something that banishes the dark. It is something that coexists with it, that needs it. Without shadow, there is no depth. Without contrast, there is no form. Without suffering, there is no awakening. The dark does not oppose the light. It reveals it. You understand now what Jung meant when he said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The purpose of consciousness was never to erase your humanity. It was to refine it, to make your mind your ally, not your master, to make your emotions your compass, not your cage, to make your pain your teacher, not your sentence. And now you see the true danger was never the unconscious itself. The true danger was in thinking you were awake when you weren't. It was in living a life so small, so programmed, so automated, that you mistook survival for purpose. It was in never daring to look inward because you feared what you'd find. But what you found, when you finally turned to face it, was not a monster. It was your own reflection, the part of you that had been calling your name through every failure, every ache, every sleepless night. It was not darkness, it was depth. It was not punishment, it was power. And when that power rises, it is silent. It does not roar or demand attention. It moves like gravity, invisible but undeniable. It speaks through calm, through clarity, through presence. You no longer seek validation, because truth itself validates you. You no longer seek control, because awareness itself guides you. You no longer seek to be saved, because you finally understand you were the savior you were waiting for. And that realization changes everything. The mind that once feared silence now craves it. The heart that once ached for approval now beats freely in its own rhythm. The eyes that once looked outward for meaning now see it reflected everywhere, in strangers, in storms, in stillness. You have become one with the seeing itself. Now you understand the sacred paradox. When you stop running from your shadow, it stops chasing you. When you stop resisting life, it stops resisting you. When you stop hiding from yourself, the entire universe steps forward to meet you. This is what it means to be truly awake, not to live without darkness, but to live without denial, to see the unseen, to feel the unfelt, to stand between opposites and realize they were never at war, they were simply waiting for you to reconcile them. The most dangerous psychology sign was never a diagnosis, it was a mirror, a warning that if you abandon the work of consciousness, your unconscious will live your life for you. But now, you've taken back the keys. Now, you are the one driving. Now, you walk through the same world, the same noise, the same chaos, the same human theater, but everything feels different. Because you're not reacting anymore. You're responding, you're aware, you are here. And in this state, life becomes art. Every moment becomes deliberate. Every choice becomes creation. You no longer need meaning to be handed to you, you generate it. You no longer need to seek the divine, you embody it. Because consciousness is not an idea. It is a divine awakening in human form. It is awareness wearing flesh, learning itself through experience. And once you understand that, there is no fear left. You can lose everything and still remain whole. You can walk through endings and see only beginnings. You can face death and recognize it as another mask of life. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, the birth of the true self. Not a self built by society, but the self that was always beneath it. The self that does not compete, does not beg, does not divide. The self that simply is. You have become that, a being of awareness, capable of holding chaos without collapsing, capable of loving the world without losing yourself. You've become dangerous, but not because you harm. You're dangerous because you see. And sight, in a world built on blindness, is the rarest power of all. The most dangerous sign Jung ever warned us about was not a shadow in others, it was the shadow within ourselves that we refuse to meet. But once you meet it, it bows. It becomes your strength, your fire, your focus, your truth. And when you walk in truth, nothing can touch you because nothing can deceive you. The noise of the world becomes background music. The opinions of others become weather passing, irrelevant. You become centered, rooted, vast. You become the still point in a turning world. So stay awake, stay alert. Not with tension, but with reverence. Not with fear, but with awareness. Because the unconscious never stops whispering, it only changes tone. And the moment you stop listening, it will try to remind you again. But now you know how to hear it. Now you know how to translate its language. Now you know that even the darkness speaks in truth. And so you walk through light and shadow, through illusion and insight, through endings and rebirths. You walk awake, alert, alive. And as you walk, you understand the final secret Jung left for those who dared to see. The unconscious was never a threat. It was a doorway. And once you step through it, you don't just survive this world. You see it. You shape it. You become it. Awake, whole, infinite. And finally, free.